Okay, so today we are going to start the sixth seal. There are two parts to the sixth seal. We will complete it next week. But first, let us go through quickly, do a review of the seals from one. The first seal represents the apostolic church going out, conquering and to conquer. Thousands came into the church through the preaching of the apostles, and that disturbed Satan. And he said, I don't like this. I'm losing all my subjects from paganism to Christianity. So then you get the second horse, the red horse. That horse, the horse that sheds the blood, that's the horse of persecution. So persecution arises during that period of the Roman emperors when paganism persecuted God's people. Then Satan says that isn't also working, because the more they were persecuted, the more the people join the church, right? So we find Satan changes in his strategy. Instead of fighting them, he joins them. So he introduces apostasy into the church. He infiltrates the church with pagan customs and practices, and he brings the world into the church, as it were. And of course, that led to spiritual famine, and ultimately it led to the death of God's people under the fourth seal, right? Primarily the yellow horse, the horse of death, the horse of the grave, and that represents the period when the papacy mowed down God's faithful people. Then, of course, in our last two studies, we had the fifth seal, which is connected with the fourth seal, because the people who died during the fourth seal, you find in the fifth seal, the fifth seal has two stages. The first set of martyrs were crying out for justice, and they were the ones who died during the 1,260 years, right? The fifth seal talks about the martyrs that died during the 2,060 years. There were martyrs before, but they were the ones that the fifth seal focuses on primarily, yeah? And they were crying for God's justice. Then we noticed that there's going to be a second stage to the fifth seal, and that is future martyrs who will cry out to God to judge and avenge those who shed their blood, right? So we found that the fifth seal had two distinctive stages, one past and one in the future. Now we're going to notice in the sixth seal that the sixth seal also has two distinct stages. But before we go into that, let's read the sixth seal. Now the sixth seal is the longest of the seals. So let's read the sixth seal.
Revelations chapter 6, verses 12 to 17. I looked when he opened the sixth seal, and behold, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became like blood, and the stars of heaven fell to the earth, as a fig tree drops its late figs when it is shaken by a mighty wind. Then the sky receded as a scroll when it is rolled up, and every mountain and island was moved out of its place. And the kings of the earth, the great men, the rich men, the commanders, and the mighty men, every slave and every free man, hid themselves in the caves and in the rocks of the mountains, and said to the mountains and rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of his wrath has come, and who is able to stand?
Okay. Now, when I personally have read these verses many times before. I always had a doubt on what the signs were. What did they mean? I don't know whether y'all got it the first time, but I always had that confusion. Are we going to have the same signs like the moon turned to blood and the dark day and the falling? Will that also happen? Today we are going to discover that this stage has two. Can you see that word, then the sky rolled? So there is definitely a division there, right? Now the moon became like blood, means it was not darkened, right? Now we have to read scripture very carefully. Then the stars fell. It is much like unripe figs falling, right? The word then is very important because that gives us two, it separates one from the other, right? And every mountain. So will the mountains also move? Will the islands disappear? The kings of the earth represent the rulers who govern the nations of the world. Great men are high officials of state, right? Then rich men are the socially wealthy. Commanders are commanders of the armies. The mighty men are the great men in battle, right? And every slave and free man are regular everyday citizens, right? Now, why do they hide themselves? Because they found themselves naked. We will notice under the sixth seal, it says, if you are not covered with the righteousness of Christ, you will be found naked, right? Spiritually, of course, right? So they were found naked according to Genesis 3:8, Revelation 16:15, and they hid like Adam and Eve hid after their sin, right? Now, fallenness, hiders refers to Hosea 10:8 and Luke 23:13. And who is able to stand? Now, that is the question. So this is the description of the sixth seal, which we are going to unpack now. Now, there are several things that we need to ask. First, first of all, which are these signs in the heaven? The great earthquake. Are they to be understood literally or symbolically, right? We know that the book of Revelation contains symbolic language, right? That must be decoded, right? However, so now does this mean it's symbolic? Is it literal, right? However, Seventh-day Adventists believe that the great earthquake and the signs in the sun and the moon and the stars were literal events. Now, why? Why were they literal? Why do we find them literal? We find the reason in the meaning of the Greek word that appears 4 times in the sixth seal, right? That is Revelation 6:12-13, and it is the word as or hot in Greek. Now, Ranko Stefanovic, he was in the book, I think he was one of New Testament scholars, right? Explain the meaning of this word, the repeated usage of the word as or like, right? As or like something in the text, that is very significant, right? Now, he explained the meaning of this word. Let's take a read. This is from his book, Revelation of Jesus Christ, page 244.
The repeated usage of the word as or like in the text appears to be very significant. The sun becomes black as sackcloth, the moon as blood, the stars of the sky fall as do the figs of the fig tree, and heaven splits as the papyrus scroll. In Greek, this word introduces a figurative analogy to an actual event that is compared with something figurative. This suggests that these heavenly signs are intended to be taken literally.
Right? Now he says as. Now the sun became black like a sackcloth. So the symbol was a sackcloth, but the sun becoming black was the literal, right? Now, then second it says the moon became as blood. So the moon that night, the day of the when the sun, the dark day of 1780, I'm right now, let me not get my dates wrong, became red as blood. So blood is the symbolism, like blood, but the literal is the moon turning to blood, right? The third, the figs that fall from a tree, now as unripe figs, right? And the fourth is as it was unfolded as a papyrus scroll, right? So the comparisons are already clear, right? Something is used as an analogy to illustrate the literal event. So they use sackcloth to illustrate the day turning to dark, then blood for the moon that turned red that night, and the stars that fell like unripened figs compared to that, and the skies open. This is the second coming of Jesus, like a scroll. So they give you the symbol and to explain the literal. So these are to be taken literal. I hope that is clear, because many times we don't understand why we take them literal, because Revelation is a book of symbols. Now there is a very strong link between the fifth and sixth seal, right? So let's notice the link between the sixth and seventh seal. We find the plea of the martyrs of the dark ages, and their question is, how long until you judge and avenge? So they're asking God, how long do we wait, right? And that is found in Revelation 6:10. Revelation 6:10 gives us the answer, right? Revelation 6:10. And the answer is found in Daniel 7:8 to 10, Daniel 8:13 to 14, where the process of judgment begins to exonerate them from the faulty verdicts of the earthly courts, right? Now, according to these passages in Daniel, the trampling of the sanctuary and of God's people would last until the conclusion of the 2,300 days or years, right? Where the process of vindicating the sanctuary and its worshippers would begin. The signs in Revelation 6:12 and 13 then are the earthly announcements that the vindicating judgment is about to begin, right? So the signs, the day turned to, the sun turned dark, the moon turned to blood, and the stars fell, are signs that there something momentous is going to happen, and that was the judgment. So in other words, these are signs that the final judgment was about to begin. Now, incidentally, every time Jesus begins a new work, there is an earthly announcement, a powerful earthly announcement, right? Jesus does not simply begin his work without announcing, bringing the people to awareness of what's happening. Now, when Jesus came to this earth and became incarnate and was born, there was a powerful announcement. The angels in heaven sang, the wise men came from the east, and the Bible says that the whole of Jerusalem was in tumult. So there was an announcement that the Messiah had been born. So people became aware of this part of Jesus's plan of salvation. Now, what about when Jesus began his ministry? Was there someone who brought attention to the idea that the Messiah was about to come? Someone who prepared the way? Yes, right? And that was John the Baptist. Now, when Jesus was about to die on the cross, there was an event also, an event in Jerusalem that attracted the eyes of everyone who had come to Jerusalem at that time, right? Because it was the Passover. So everyone, all Jews had congregated from all parts of the world. And what was that? It was the triumphal entry into Jerusalem, right? Where everybody on that Palm Sunday, everybody was aware that something momentous was about to happen. Now, what about the resurrection of Christ? There was a powerful message that Jesus was resurrected, right? When there was this earthquake and the first fruits, the dead, actually Mrs. White says the martyrs from the time of Abel down, martyrs were resurrected. So you got these huge men who would have been 15 feet tall, and then maybe the others who were about 6 feet or whatever. They walked through Jerusalem to announce, through the city to announce that Jesus had been resurrected. Now, that would have been another powerful announcement. Now, the day of Pentecost, that was when Jesus was installed as high priest. We studied that. There was this powerful and earthly announcement where there was a mighty rushing wind and then tongues of fire. And then the disciples began to talk in languages that they hadn't spoken before. They knew the language perfectly. So they were able, once again, Pentecost was a big feast. So there were many people from other parts of the world who had congregated in Jerusalem. So they were able to understand Peter's sermon, right? So now let me ask you, would you expect a powerful announcement indicating that the investigative judgment was about to begin? Of course, right? There would be a sign. Now, these signs actually have the main purpose of indicating to the inhabitants of the world start studying prophecy, because when you see these things happening, immediately your mind is going to be taken to Revelation 6, 12, and 13. That is presuming that you have studied. So what God is saying is study scripture, because it's very important. There's an important event about to transpire. And then, of course, we find that the Millerites also made a powerful announcement about the coming day of judgment. They preached to the then inhabited Christian world, right? To Europe, to mainly in Northeastern America, all over America, and even South America. This announcement went that the day of judgment was going to take place. Now, do you suppose that there was going to be some kind of earthly indication that the judgment of the living is beginning? Do you think there's going to be? Yes, because if you follow God, follows a pattern, right? What would it be? There is this powerful angel of Revelation 18, 1 and 1 to 4, I think, who descends from heaven, fills the whole earth with his glory, and proclaims the fall of Babylon, which divides the world into two groups, right? That is the loud cry and the outpouring of the latter rain, and people going out to give the final message, come out of Babylon, right? Now that will be the final proclamation, right? That the judgment that began in 1844 with the dead is now passing into a new stage, and that's the stage of the living, right? We don't have a date for that. God hasn't given us dates. But when time passes, what happens? People are worse off than before, because they say, what is the use of these predictions? They have never taken place. So that is why Mrs. White said 1844 is the last date. No more dates for prophetic events, right? It is noteworthy that the sixth church, the open door to the most holy place, the sixth seal, that is the sealing of the 144,000 during the judgment of the living, and the sixth trumpet, the vision of the Ark of the Covenant, all take us to the same moment in the course of the Christian church's history. Now, under the sixth church, God places before the church an open door. Where does that door lead? It leads to the most holy place for the final judgment, right? Now, under the sixth seal, you have the sealing of the 144,000 that has to do with the judgment of the living, because the judgment of the dead has finished. And under the sixth trumpet, that is the end of the sixth trumpet, you have this opening of the temple in heaven, and the ark of his covenant is seen, and then marches out the plague angels. So when you get to number 6, whether it be churches, seals, or trumpets, you at the same moment of time, the beginning of the investigative judgment in 1844. So God announces then the announcement of the living, judgment of the living. In the future, God will announce it, right? Now, the sixth seal mentions 2 earthquakes. Did you notice that? Sometimes when we read the Bible, we hardly notice things, right? The sixth seal also has 2 earthquakes. One transpires, one takes place at the beginning of the sixth seal, and the other at the end. Now, the fact is that there are 2 earthquakes, which seem to indicate that there are 2 stages, right? So verse 12 of Revelation 6 describes the one at the beginning, right? The earthquake in Revelation 12 is the one at the beginning, when the judgment of the investigative judgment was about to begin. Then verse 14 of Revelation 6 describes the one that will end. That's the ending point, right? So Revelation 16, 18, and 20, which is the seventh plague, further amplifies the second earthquake as a cataclysmic and global event. That is to say, the earthquake of Revelation 6:14 is the same one as Revelation 16, 18, and 20, which is the seventh plague, right? Which is right at the moment when Jesus comes, right? Is that clear? So the earthquake in Revelation 6:12 is preliminary and local. The one in Revelation 16, 18 is global and the greatest in human history, right? According to the Bible. Only the greatest earthquake in history could remove mountains, move islands, islands disappear from their place on a global scale. So are you catching that? It can't happen before Jesus comes. It happens at the point when Jesus comes, right? Now, what is the purpose of the signs? Now we're going to put some flesh on the bones. We are going to prove it. And I want you to have a clear mind, right? Now, what are the purposes of the sign? First, they announce the great tribulation is about to end. Now, this is Matthew 24:29. Second, they serve as an omen of the fall of the papal power. Third, they serve to draw attention to the approaching judgment of 1844. Fourth, they serve as indicators of the beginning of the time of the end, right? There are two things. One is the time of the end, one is the end time. Time of the end is the beginning, end time is the end, right? We will go through that. Just keep that in mind. Put it away in your mind. Finally, they announce the soon coming of Jesus. Now, what do they mean by the soon coming of Jesus? How is it possible to believe that events that took place about 2,250 years ago are signs of the soon coming of Jesus? Isn't that stretching it a bit, stretching it to the limit? On the surface, this argument might appear persuasive until we look at the number of years in the context of a broader perspective. Now, suppose we say, for argument's sake, that I'm going to take a, say, 6,000-mile trip, right? Maybe I'm going to Australia, 3,000 miles, right? When I start the trip, we all agree that the destination is very far, 10 hours, 10 and a half hours, depending on the headwind. When I'm halfway there, maybe flying over Bangkok or something, the destination is still a long way off, but I'm closer to it than I was when I left Colombo. However, would you agree that when I'm over Australia, Darwin, coming over Darwin, that I'm closer to my destination, right? So my arrival is near to get off at Tullamarine Airport, right? So after all, 250 years compared to the 6,000 years is only a 4%, right? Look at it from that perspective, right? It is 250 years, it's long, but when you compare it with the 6,000 years, it is a fraction of the time. Now, the late C. Mervyn Maxwell, I think we have heard of him, in his book, Magnificent Disappointment, page 91 and 92, which was published in 1994, puts 1844 and the nearest of the second coming in perspective. Let's read that and see. Now, remember, the book was written in the 1990s, right?
We need a change of perspective. Instead of looking back to 1844 and finding it around 150 years in the past, let us go back to the beginning of human history and view 1844 as almost 6,000 years in the future. From the perspective of Eden, at the beginning of Earth's 6,000 years, the remaining distance between 1844 and the 1990s is hardly discernible. These 150 years between 1844 and the 1990s represent only 1/40th, 2.5% of human history. More than 97% of human history took place prior to 1844. Yes, we are indeed in the end time. The final judgment began only yesterday, as it were. Christ's second advent is coming soon.
So is that clearer? So it all depends on what perspective you use, right? If you use a perspective from our time, then 250 years seems a long time. But if you look at it from the entire whole sweep of Christian history, then it becomes a different story, right? Now, what makes the Lisbon earthquake was one of the most powerful earthquakes, right? I was reading on somewhere, it changed the entire world, they say, right? What makes the Lisbon earthquake of 1755, the dark day of 1780, and the moon looking like blood also in 1718, the same day, May 19, and the Leonid star shower of 1833, so unique. There have been these phenomena on occasions after that and before that. Now the point, the answer is found in 4 points. Their location, where they took place, the order, were they in the order that Revelation 6 tells us, their timing, when did they take place, and their intensity, right? So let's look into their location. Now, it's not coincidental that these signs occurred in Europe and the United States. Europe was significant because there the papacy would receive the deadly wound that would mark the end of the 1,260 years of tribulation. That was in France, right? The United States was significant, especially New England, because there the message of the judgment would be proclaimed powerfully by the Millerites beginning in 1830. Now, Mervyn Maxwell, once again in his book, Magnificent Disappointment, explains this beautifully. We'll read it in a bit. No, maybe let's read that now.
The location of the classic signs was highly significant. They happened in Europe and America primarily, where people were studying the Bible and pondering the prophecies. A dark day in the Sahara Desert or a star shower over New Guinea would have said little in those days about the second coming of Christ to cannibal headhunters or Muslim nomads. Even need not be universal to deliver a global message. A few square miles at Hiroshima and Nagasaki was sufficient to announce the atomic age. A stable in Bethlehem ushered in Christian era. Only a few hundred people saw Jesus after his resurrection, but they told others.
Are you catching the point? It's so beautifully written, isn't it? And it's
Yeah.
a good point. Right. Now, secondly, these signs are special because of their order. Not only the location, they occurred in an order, the order in which they occurred is also significant. These phenomena occurred in history precisely in chronological order as described in Revelation 6. Now, remember, Revelation 6 was written, the vision was given to John in late AD 90. So these are happening in in the 1700s and the 1800s and the 1900s, right? So many years after, right? So, but they're precisely in chronological order. Now, the Lisbon earthquake, I have put it up there. It says, I looked and he opened the sixth seal and behold, there was a great earthquake. So that's the reference to the Lisbon earthquake. And the sun became black as sackcloth of hair. That was the dark day of May 17 of 1780. And the same night, the moon became as blood. Then a star shower took place in 1833. It's called the Leonid star shower because it came from the from the Leo, right? We'll come to that. Now, So we find that precisely first what takes place is the Lisbon earthquake, right? Then the dark take happens in 1780, and the star shower took place in 1830. Now, I don't think we have anywhere else in human history where these phenomena take place in this precise order within a period of less than 100 years, right? The order of the signs led the people to study the prophecies like the wise men, right? When they saw the star, they knew what the prophecy was. Because they say, yes, Lisbon, the greatest earthquake ever in the history of the world, at that point, right? It was a 9.0 earthquake during that time in the 1700s. Of course, we had a the Sumatra earthquake in 2014, right? Or was it? Oh, okay, now I'm forgetting. They say the sun darkened, the moon became like blood, and then the shower of stars. They say that, what does that bring to mind, right? If people had been studying their Bible, they will go to Revelation because they have read it before, right? So that led them to search the scriptures in the order with the signs. Now, these signs were not just run-of-the-mill signs; they were significant. There was a journalist who wrote about the dark day. They said even the birds went to sleep. People lit their lamps. People came home because it was as dark as night. And then in the night, the full moon rose, and it was as blood, right? And the star shower took place. It just lighted up. There were, it wasn't just a shooting star. It was millions of stars falling, right, over a period of time. So that caught their attention for them to study scripture more deeply. Now the time, right? These signs occurred precisely at the right time. That was immediately before the 1260-year tribulation came to an end. It was the waning of the 1260 years, just before the fulfillment of the prophecies concerning the fall of the papacy, which took place in 1798, and the beginning of the judgment in 1840. So these happened 1755, 1780, then in 1833, that was just before the beginning of the judgment. And then finally their intensity, how intense was it? Was it just a normal thing? Now, concerning the intensity of the signs, Mervyn Maxwell has well stated it. Now, like I said, it was the Leonid shower because it came from the constellation of Leo. That's what I was trying to get at. So that's why it's called the Leonid shower. And let's read what Mervyn Maxwell has to say about that.
Intensity. As recently as 1980, the widely respected seismologist G.A.I.B. in chapter 11 of his book Earthquakes ranked the Lisbon earthquake as the largest shock ever and reckoned that it may well have reached an almost incredible 9.0 on the Richter scale, 7 times stronger than the 1906 San Francisco earthquake. The dark day of May 19, 1780 has not been equaled in North America in the 200 years that have since come and gone. The Leonid shower of November 13, 1833 gave birth to a new branch of astronomy. Like the Lisbon earthquake and the famous dark day, it too has not been matched in spite of the scientific expectations that it would be.
So that is the intensity, right? So we have good reason as Adventists to believe that these signs were fulfilled on the date in which the Adventists have said they were fulfilled, right? We were not just guessing. There are reasons, and once again, the 4 reasons. First is the location that took place. Second is the order, in the exact order that we find it in Revelation 6. And the time, right when the 1260 years were coming to an end, the papacy was about to receive a deadly wound. the judgment was about to begin, and finally the intensity of these particular signs. So you can, all of us can do additional research if you Google these dates and events that took place, and you'll find journalists' accounts of this so that we understand it a little better. Now moving on. Ellen White and the sixth seal. Now let's see what Mrs. White had to say about the sixth seal. Now this is very interesting. Mrs. White explains the first part of the sixth seal in the book Great Controversy on page 3 or 4. She deals with the Lisbon earthquake, with the dark day, the moon looking like blood. And on page 3 or 4, and up to 333, she talks about it, right? On page 3 or 4, she quotes Revelation 6:12. Then on page 33, she quotes Revelation 6:13, which all refer to those signs, right? So there you find, so we find a commentary of Revelation and 12. But now something very interesting happened. You know, Mrs. White was inspired in her writing, right? So that is very clear when you study Revelation and the Great Controversy. However, after that, she does not quote on these pages verses 14 to 17. She does not quote verses 14 to 17, which is the second part of the sixth seal, until she comes to page 641 and 642. That is about 300 pages between where she quoted first verses 12 and 13. And then after 300 pages, she quotes Revelation 14 through 17. Now, what is the reason for this 300-page gap between her comments of Revelation 12 and 13 and then her remarks on Revelation 14 through 17? In order to understand and comprehend this long parenthesis, this long break between the first and the last part of the seal, we must remember some things that we studied under the fifth seal. How many stages did the fifth seal have? 2, right? How many to the sixth seal? How many stages? There are 2 stages. Now, let's notice this. The papacy has how many stages of power? She had power past 1,260 years, and then the Bible tells us that she will have power in the future when her wound is healed at the end of time. So she has 2 stages, okay? Therefore, if she has 2 stages and she's a persecuting power, there has to be 2 stages of tribulation as well. Is that logical? I mean, that is quite obvious, that, right? So the first stage of the papal persecution is past. Now that was the Great Tribulation. In terms of length, 1,260 years, it's a long time, right? So that was the greatest tribulation in terms of length. And then the greatest tribulation in history with regards to intensity takes place in the future. So there are 2 stages for the papacy, and because this papacy has 2 stages, you will have 2 stages of persecution as well. One is past, one is the future. Just like 1,260 years is past, her wound heals in the future. She persecuted in the past during the 1,260 years. She will persecute in the future. So remember that clearly, right? Because that is very important, the stages. Now, regarding the first period, that is the 1,260 years, Mrs. White wrote in The Desire of Ages, page 631. Let's give it a read.
For more than 1,000 years, such persecution as the world had never before known was to come upon Christ's followers. Millions upon millions of his faithful witnesses were to be slain.
Now, we said that God has great announcements on earth, right? We studied that when these things are about to happen. So if the papacy has 2 stages, the tribulation has 2 stages, Do you think that the science of the heavens also has two stages? It has to, right? Now let's study this a little more. Now, this is something that always confused me till I studied, right? Because when you study Matthew 24, all of a sudden you get earthquakes that move the mountain. And then I'm wondering, and I always wondered, will there be another dark day? Will there be another stars falling? Will there be another huge earthquake like that? Till I understood it like this, right? So let's unpack this. Now we know. So what does it mean? The first group of cosmic signs announced the end of the first period of tribulation, when the 1,260 years were coming to an end, and the soon to begin judgment, which is a portion of the fifth seal, right? Avenge. How long, Lord, do you avenge? So 1844, we know, was the beginning of the judgment. Now, the second set of cosmic signs announced the end of the second tribulation period and the avenging portion of the fifth seal. Remember, the fifth seal also had two parts. The first is they ask, and Jesus says, wait a while, your white robes are there till the rest of your martyrs are killed, right? So the next portion of this cosmic event that take place in Revelation 6, 12 to 17, it's from 14 to 17, is the avenging portion of the fifth seal. So in between these 2 points of time, we have the vindicative judgment of the martyrs and the sealing of the 144 living saints. That is the judgment of the living. Now let's continue. The first stage of signs took place in 1755, 1780, and 1830, right? We just went through it. The Lisbon earthquake, the sun darkened, the moon turned to blood, and the stars fell from heaven. These signs announced the first stage. They announced that the investigative judgment was about to begin, right? 1833, they had just 11 years more before the judgment began, right? So the first stage of persecution by the papacy was about to come to an end, and the vindicative judgment was about to begin. Now, these signs are referred to, like I said, in Revelation 6, 12, and 13, and Joel 2:31, because we always refer to Joel for these signs. So Joel also has the 2 stages, right? So Joel 2:31 refers to the first set, okay? The second stage of signs will take place immediately before the second coming of Jesus. Just imagine you and I are living on an island. If the island disappears, where will you and I stand on? Now, Angel is on a subcontinent. Dushan is also on a continent. You and I will be floating in the sea, right? And there will be a tsunami. So it has to be the second coming of Jesus, just before the second coming of Jesus. And this will mark the deliverance of the saints from the second stage of persecution by the papacy. And this is referred to in Revelation 6:14 to 17. It describes the sign. So go after the study, go to Revelation 6, read it for yourself and try to understand it when you look at it, right? Now, the second set of signs. Now, let's talk about the second set of signs. Is there going to be an earthquake when Jesus comes? A global earthquake. Now, the earlier one was in Lisbon, right? It was felt all over the world, but it was confined to Europe, right? Now, this earthquake is going to be global, right? Is the sun going to be darkened? Is the moon going to be blood? No. Because Revelation 14 and 17 tell us something else about the sun and the moon. Are the stars going to fall from heaven? No. Now, the signs in Revelation 6, 12, and 13 are different to the signs in verses 14 to 17. So the earthquake becomes global, what was local, but the signs are different, but they have to do with the sun and the moon, right? And the stars. Now, the verses 12 and 13 announce what was going to happen in 1844. The signs that take place in verses 14 through 17 announce the coming of Jesus, right? Now, let's unpack this. Will the signs of 12 and 13, Revelation 6, 12 and 13, have another fulfillment in the future? No. Joel 3:31. Remember? Joel 3:31 and Revelation 6, 12 to 13 have two important details that distinguish these signs from the ones in the future. We need to read scripture carefully when there are certain things that are said differently in two verses. When something is missing in a verse that is not in the other verse, it's important. Now let's pursue this a little bit. First, according to Joel 2:31, okay, the signs of Revelation 12 and 13 take place or occur before the great and terrible day of the Lord, right? So they take place, the great and terrible day of the Lord is the second coming. So they take place before, right? The second is in the signs of Revelation 12 and 13, the moon looks like blood and the stars fall from heaven. However, if you read Revelation 6, 14 through 17, which occurs at the time of the second coming, what is stated there is that the moon and the stars do not give their light. It's a huge difference, right? So now when the stars fell in 1834, there was a lot of light, believe me, right? So we begin to see that there are two sets of signs as well. One set of signs that lead to the beginning of the judgment. The other set of signs announces the avenging part, or in other words, Jesus is coming to deliver his people from the death decree, right? Now, Joel 2, 10 to 11, and Joel 3, 15 to 16, and Matthew 24, 13 refer to a second great earthquake and a set of signs in the heavenly bodies that will be fulfilled when Jesus comes. These signs will occur, take place, as Jesus is preparing to leave heaven for earth, right? And the darkening of the sun. Now, it is not that the moon turned, the sun turned dark. The second set, the sun didn't give light and the moon didn't give light and the stars didn't give light, right? This will announce the coming of Jesus. This will be a cosmic global earthquake as well in heaven and on earth that announces his departure. So when the sun doesn't give its light, when the moon doesn't give its light, when the stars don't give its light, it announces Jesus coming. Now, when they don't give light, if you read Isaiah, we will read Isaiah in a bit, it means that these, when Jesus comes, when the earthquake takes place, these heavenly bodies get displaced. They get pushed from where God put them at creation and they go back to pre-creation week. Now I'm jumping here. So we have two sets of signs as well. One that took place at the beginning and one that will take place at the end that announces the second coming of Jesus. Now, let's notice Revelation 12:13 once more. These verses describe the moon. It says, I looked and he opened the sixth seal and behold, there was a great earthquake. The sun became black as sackcloth. That is not darkening, it became black, right? And the moon became like blood, right? Now this text tells us that the stars fell from heaven, dropped, right? These were the preliminary signs, right? And are not the same ones as what we found in Matthew 24, as what we find in Matthew 24. When the voice of God, when he announces the end of the judgment of the living, end of the judgment, the close of judgment, God's voice moves the sun and the moon and the stars out of their places. And as a result, like I said, the planet will be in darkness during the millennium. Now notice these verses like we read. And also notice Joel 2:31, also Acts 2:20. We are now going to read Acts 2:20, where we find this. Let's read Joel 2:31.
The sun shall be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the coming of the great and awesome day of the Lord.
So Joel here tells us that these first signs, the first set of signs happen before the second coming of Jesus, right? So they take place before. Now, once again, these are the signs from Revelation 6, 12 and 13 that announce the beginning of the judgment, okay? Now, on the other hand, these other passages that we are going to look at now, the signs in the sun, moon, and stars, and the earthquake when Jesus comes. Now, these depict different signs, right? Different to those that we read just now in verses 12 and 13 of Revelation and Joel 2:31. Let's read Joel 2, 10 to 11.
The earth quakes before them, the heavens tremble, the sun and moon grow dark, and the stars diminish their brightness. The Lord gives voice before his army, for his camp is very great. For strong is the one who executes his word. For the day of the Lord is great and very terrible. Who can endure it?
Okay, now let's read. What is it? What does it say? Them, it's talking about God's army, right? Am I reading that? Yes. This is Jesus coming on the white horse, the armies of heaven following him. And this is the second set of signs that announce the second coming of Jesus, right? So if you read it in context, if you read Joel 2, you will understand. The stars diminish their brightness. They are not falling, right? They diminish. They no longer shine. Now, is this the same question at the end of the sixth seal? It says, who can endure it, right? Are they the signs of Revelation 12:13? No. Now, notice Joel 3:15 and 16.
The sun and moon will grow dark, and the stars will diminish their brightness. The Lord also will roar from Zion and utter his voice from Jerusalem. The heavens and earth will shake, but the Lord will be a shelter for his people and the strength of the children of Israel.
Now, God will be a shelter because of wicked heart trying to kill God's people. The death decree has been enacted. Now we have another verse in Isaiah 13, 10 to 13. This passage is not parallel to Revelation 6, 12 to 13. In these verses, the sun, the moon, and the stars grow dark, right? They do not, this did not happen in 1755, 1780, or 1783. But this happens when Jesus comes, the voice of God moves the heavens and the earth out of their place. Let's read Isaiah 13, 10 to 13.
Behold, the day of the Lord comes, cruel with both wrath and fierce anger, to lay the land desolate, and he will destroy its sinners from it. But the stars of heaven and their constellations will not give their light. The sun will be darkened in its going forth, and the moon will not cause its light to shine. I will punish the world for its evil and the wicked for their iniquity. I will halt the arrogance of the proud, and I will lay low the haughtiness of the terrible. I will make a mortal more than fine gold, a man more than the golden wedge of Ophir. Therefore, I will shake the heavens, and the earth will move out of her place in the wrath of the Lord of hosts and in the day of his fierce anger.
See, Isaiah tells us that God's voice will move the earth from its place. Because right now, God put the sun and the moon in their places to benefit the earth. So the earth goes back to pre-creation, right? It's dark. So the millennium will be dark. Now, when Jesus comes, the earth will be fully lighted up because there will be thunders and lightnings, and Jesus' presence will be there. After he takes us, this earth will be fully dark, right? So, so we come to the inevitable conclusion that the signs of Joel 2:31 and Acts 2:20, like I said, we didn't read that, and Revelation 6:12 and 13 are different to the ones that we find in Matthew 24:30, Joel 2:10-11, Joel 3:15-16, and Isaiah 13:10-13, right? So there are two sets of signs. Is that clear? Bit confusing. Maybe if you go through what we are recording, you will find it, or read the Bible and you will find it. Now, there is a difference between the expression, the time of the end, and the end of time. Listen that carefully. The time of the end and the end of time. While the signs in Revelation 6:13 and 12 and 13 announced that the history of the planet was entering upon the time of the end. So the time of the end began in 1798 when the papacy was taken captive, right? Now the signs in Matthew 24:30 and its parallel passages of Luke and Mark and Luke announce end of time. Now let's notice Matthew 24:29-31. Let's read that and see the signs. Now, what signs Matthew 24:30 is referring to?
Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from heaven and the powers of heavens will be shaken. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other.
Okay, so if you read Matthew 24 is in chronological order, sequential order, right? Matthew 24, the events are listed in sequential order. There are two references to tribulation in Matthew 24. Verses 21 mentions the tribulation, and that's the period of papal persecution. And then in verse 29, you have the tribulation again, because that's the second stage to the tribulation, right? Now, are these the same signs that led to 1844? No, because Matthew 24 says immediately after the tribulation of these days, this is the final tribulation, right? The second stage of the tribulation. What happens? Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven. Then all the tribes of the earth will mourn. Now, is that similar to Revelation 14:17? So Matthew 24:29-31 is talking about the time when Jesus comes. But Matthew 21 talks about the time of the end of the papal persecution, end of the 1260 years, right? So once again, Matthew 24 announces the beginning of the investigative judgment and also the second coming of Jesus, right? So there are two events mentioned in Matthew 24. It announces the beginning and it announces the second coming. Now, who are the powers of the heaven? Matthew 24:29, Genesis 1:16 tells us that the sun was made to rule the day and the moon and stars were made to rule the night. Ellen White, in early writings, page 41, explains very well what will happen with the heavenly bodies when Jesus comes. Now, this is a very significant statement. Let's give it a read.
Who are the powers of the heavens in Matthew chapter 24, verse 29? I saw that when the Lord said heaven in giving the signs recorded by Matthew, Mark, and Luke, he meant heaven. And when he said earth, he meant earth. The powers of heaven are the sun, moon, and stars. They rule in the heavens. The powers of earth are those that rule on the earth. The powers of heaven will be shaken at the voice of God. Then the sun, moon, and stars will be moved out of their places. They will not pass away, but be shaken by the voice of God.
So is that clear? So they will be moved out from where they are beneficial to earth. Because once Jesus recreates the earth, he will bring those back and put them in a position where they will be beneficial to the new earth again, right? So who are the powers of the heaven? The powers of heaven are the sun, moon, and stars. That is the reason why in the millennium, the earth will be without form and void. Jeremiah said in Jeremiah 4:23 and onwards, I beheld the heavens and in them there was no light. Why? Because the sun and the moon and the stars had been darkened. They had been moved out of their position where they are beneficial to us. Now moving on. As we have stated before, remember Mrs. White spoke about the beginning in pages 304 to 333 in Great Controversy, and then applies them to the signs that took place at the beginning before the investigative judgment, and then she doesn't quote till up 300 pages. The rest of the verses of Revelation 6, that is 14 through 17. Now let's read a passage where she quotes Revelation 6, 14 and 15 through 17. She's actually quoting the chapter that has to do with the second coming of Jesus.
Ellen G. White and the signs. The King of Kings descends upon the cloud, wrapped in flaming fire. The heavens are rolled together as a scroll. The earth trembles before him, and every mountain and island is moved out of its place. Revelation chapter 6, verse 14. And the kings of the earth, and the great men, and the rich men, and the chief captains, and the mighty men, and every bondman, and every freeman, hid themselves in the dens and in the rocks of the mountains, and said to the mountains and rocks, fall on us, and hide us from the face of him that sitteth on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of his wrath is come, and who shall be able to stand?
So this is clearly describing the second coming, right? So where does Mrs. White see the fulfillment of verses 14 and 17? She sees the fulfillment of it at the second coming. Where does she see the fulfillment of verses 12 to 13? The signs that announce, she sees it that the signs that announce the end of papal dominion, the first stage, right? The end of the tribulations of the 1,260 years, which was once again the first tribulation, and the beginning of the time of the end, and the beginning of the investigative judgment. So Mrs. White got it clear, my friend. She got it clear because she was inspired, right? Now, this is the real reason why you have the sign. It is not to indicate that Jesus is coming tomorrow. We already looked at that, right? Now, God gives us this warning for us to get ready. Why did Mrs. White separate these two sections of verses, right? Clearly because she knew there would be a long time or a parenthesis. Now we will study those, the parentheses of this, right? Once again, to be clear, there are two sets of signs. One marks the beginning of the judgment, the end of the first tribulation of the papacy. The next one announces the end of the tribulation, which will be in the future, just before Jesus comes, right? If that is clear, I suppose, right? Now, so as we have noticed, there's a close connection between the fifth and sixth seal. The fifth seal, we see two groups of martyrs, one past, one future. The signs in the sixth seal, we see the announcement of the period of oppression. The first group of martyrs was about to end. And then on the other hand, Revelation 14:7 to 17, there is an announcement that the oppression of the second group of martyrs has come to an end because God's people are going to be delivered by the voice of God, right? It's God's voice that delivers. Even just to digress a little bit, when the three Hebrews were thrown into the furnace, it was the king's voice that called them out, right? That is figurative. It's figurative to the voice of God when he says, it is finished, right? And then he comes, it's his voice that calls causes these signs to take place, right? The deliverance, and which causes the cosmic global earthquake, moves the sun and the moon and the stars out of their places. Now let's move on. Now let's read the statement of Mrs. White on these signs that took place once again, the two earlier, the first group of signs. Let's read that.
Prophecy not only foretells the manner and object of Christ's coming, but presents tokens by which men are to know when it is near. Said Jesus, there shall be signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars. Luke chapter 21, verse 25. The sun shall be darkened and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars of heaven shall fall, and the powers that are in heaven shall be shaken. And then shall they see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory. The Revelator thus describes the first of the signs to precede the second advent. There was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became as blood.
So she quotes Revelation 6:12, but she also quotes Luke 21. Let's go to Luke 21. Let's find out the meaning of Luke 21, 25, and 26. Let's read those verses and let's unpack it a little bit.
And there will be signs in the sun, in the moon, and in the stars, and on the earth distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them from fear and the expectation of those things which are coming on the earth. For the powers of heaven will be shaken.
Now this verse, right, many times, our good Adventist evangelists frequently use these words to describe the present turmoil in the world. But if you study Luke 21 and you look at it more closely in the context it is written, these verses indicate or describe what will happen at the very end of human history, right? As an announcement for the coming of Jesus, right? So what is happening now pales in comparison to what is going to happen, what Luke is talking about here. So we have to be careful not to take these verses out of its legitimate context, right? They are not referring to present distress among the nations. They're actually referring to the distress that comes when God's voice moves. Imagine if you are, I hope we are living, right? We are part of the 140,000. We are living and then the sun stops giving light, the moon stops giving light, the stars stop giving light, and this huge earthquake and tsunamis and everything, right? They are all turned into place. Naturally, the people will fear, those who don't know Jesus, because we find the same statement. We find it in Matthew 24. So Matthew 24 and Luke 21 are the corresponding passages of the book, and Luke also, right? So that talks about these last day events. So that is why they are the synoptic gospels, where the second coming is, Jesus gives the events of the second coming, right? So we find these same statements in Matthew 24, where it says, the powers of heaven will be shaken. And we found out that the powers of heaven are the sun, moon, and the stars. And if you come to Matthew, when you compare Matthew with Luke, Luke gives you an extra description of what is going to be moved out of place, right? And then when God utters his voice in deliverance of his people, it shakes the heavens and earth. God's voice will be reverberate, right? The sea is lashed in its fury, and the whole earth heaves and swells like the waves of the sea. Mountain chains and islands disappear, like it says in Luke 21, right? And they disappear. So please be on God's side, otherwise we as an island Emma will also disappear if we are not part of that saved group.
Yeah.
Let's read this statement from Mrs. White, Maranatha, page 280.
The mountains shake like a reed in the wind, and ragged Rocks are scattered on every side. There is a roar as of a coming tempest. The sea is lashed into fury. There is heard the shriek of a hurricane like the voice of demons upon a mission of destruction. The whole earth heavens and swells like the waves of the sea. Its surface is breaking up. Its very foundations seem to be giving way. Mountains, chains are sinking. The inhabited islands disappear. The seaports that have become like Sodom for wickedness are swallowed up by the angry waters.
Good reason for us to be on the Lord's side, right? Now, she's using Luke 21 language, right? And she alludes to Revelation 6:14 to 17, right? So in context, where does Luke 21 fit? It fits with the second set of signs just before Jesus is coming, right? Is there going to be distress among nations? Definitely, we don't know what distress is right now. When people see the signs of Jesus' second coming and the earthquake and the sea, right? Now, I, for one, after the 2004 tsunami, I don't like staying near the sea. Now, when I came back and I had to be in quarantine near the sea, I could hear the sea. And I prayed every night, Lord, let there not be an earthquake somewhere that the sea comes in, because I would have got washed out because I was just near the sea. So I don't like the sea, right? Now here, Ellen White is using the language, like I said, of Luke 21:26 to describe what will take place when God delivers his people, when Jesus comes the second time. The waves of the tsunami that hit Lisbon and the waves of the tsunami that hit us were child's play compared with the waves of the sea that will engulf the world, right? You and I haven't seen it. And finally, let's read this from Sons and Daughters of God, page 354. Once again, Mrs. White is going to describe when the perplexities among the nations, when the waves roar and everything, it is not in the present period, during probationary period. It's immediately before the second coming of Christ, right? Or the second, those are the signs that take place just before Jesus comes. Let's read that.
There are troublous times before us. The judgments of God are coming upon our world. The nations of the earth are to tremble. There will be trials and perplexities. On every hand. Men's hearts will fail them for fear. And what shall we do in that day? Though the earth shall reel to and fro like a drunkard and be removed like a cottage. If we have made God our trust, he will deliver us.
Oh, there's the promise. Right, there's the promise. So is that clear? Are we clear about the two stages of the sixth seal? One has passed, one is future. Then there are the signs to announce. There were signs to announce both. One is past, one is future. And these two fit in with the fifth seal, right? So I hope that is clear, right? So you get the fifth seal, you get the judging and avenging is the first sign that announces that Jesus is going to judge. And the judgment began in 1844, October 22. Right? It was the investigative judgment. And then the second set of signs is to announce that the king is coming, that Jesus is coming, and also that Jesus is going to avenge his people by raising those who died and by delivering from the death decree those who are alive. When Jesus comes, that's 144,000 saints. So the seal 5 speaks about martyrs saying that, when are you going to judge and avenge? God says, don't worry. I'm going to give you signs to tell you when I'm going to judge, and you will know when judgment is starting. And then when I come, I will avenge you. So the fifth seal and the sixth seal need to be studied together, right? And I hope we understood